Hey, welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. I have a special guest with me tonight. Her name is Michelle Louise Bicking. She is running for governor of Connecticut as a Green Party member. Thanks so much for coming on, Michelle.
Thank you so much for having me. Good evening, everyone.
So first and foremost, we've been covering a lot of third-party candidates on this show and on RBN as well. Recently, we actually just featured Michael, who's running for state office in Connecticut as well. He's also running through the Green Party. But I want to get your take on this. Why did you decide to run as a third-party candidate instead of running through the Democratic Party or the Republican Party?
I don't believe in the existence of third parties. There are only parties. This moniker attached to not being attached to the duopoly is really unnerving to me because according to the Constitution, there shouldn't be any existence of parties at all. So I vote with my values. And when I came to Connecticut some 13 years ago, I was looking for a party that represented those values most effectively. The Green Party is the only party that resonated with me because part of their tenets is the focus on ecological justice, environmental justice. A second thing that was really appealing to me because I had been drawn to international affairs. I actually got my first master's in a master's in international program that was focusing on that level of reach. It was a global party. I mean, you have the Green Party in the Philippines, you have the Green Party in Eastern Europe, we have the Green Party in different parts of the Americas. And I really wanted to be a part of a community that was just far reaching and not just centered locally, because I identify as being a global citizen.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, we've had a lot to say about the two-party system on this show in particular, and we just don't see any type of real change coming from the Democrats or the Republicans. And so we've been advocating for people to try to start voting for people who are running as an independent or people who are running as, Green Party instead and see how things work out for you. Now, one of the things that I've been highlighting as well is local elections, because I feel like a lot of times there's a lot of focus on the national level. Who's running for Congress? Who's running for president? And I feel like the local elections are often forgotten about. And I feel like that's unfortunate because right now there are governors and there are mayors that are making decisions across this country. And a lot of people are not paying attention to what's going on, or they're not even paying attention to certain ballot questions that could affect them in their state. And I know that with Connecticut, I mean, you're my neighboring state. I'm in Massachusetts. I know that there are things that have been passed in Connecticut, sometimes because there were ballot initiatives in Massachusetts that may have put that pressure on a neighboring state like Connecticut to get that done. So how do you feel about people kind of checking out of local politics and focusing primarily on the national level?
I think it's good policy to really, in a sense of, making a difference where you are. To really be involved in the persons who are saying they're looking to represent you, and finding out what are their deliverables, like what are they looking to accomplish, how are they seeking to accomplish it, what kind of connections have they made to community-based organizations, actually representatives of families, friends, neighbors that live in the neighborhoods that they serve. Like, I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York, East New York section, and for example, most of the police force lives out of state. They don't live there. So they really don't have any skin in the game in terms of our long-term livelihood. And I grew up during a time where it was common knowledge that you never called the police in the case of emergency. You called the fire department. One, because they're CPR certified. Two, because they have better manners. And three, because they show up faster than anyone else, including the police. So, it really does make a difference on a local level. And you get more sway in terms of how things are done, neighborhood by neighborhood track. So yes, I do definitely agree with that.
Well said. I want to take a look here at your site. So Eric, if you can put this link in the chat for everyone so they can go to this page as well.
Thank you, Eric.
Making room at the table for all. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I must give thanks to our elders in the movement for freedom of all peoples. not just people of the diaspora. Fannie Lou Hamer and Shirley Chisholm, most saliently for me. And the thought of this, metaphorical table where decisions are being made, um, there is a profound absence of those who are most affected by those decisions. And in my mind, it makes sense to have as many people who can afford the time and the effort to be present, because some of us just can't do it. We can't, either we're homebound or we're sick and elderly or shut in, or we may have disabilities that impair our ability to communicate in certain ways. But all of us deserve to be heard. All of us deserve to be fed at that same table. So I always imagine that this movement called My Effort for this governor's race will be something along those lines, where we're making room, we're making space for those who have been shut out, who have been purposely ignored.
Well said. One of the things that's mentioned here in reference to people, it says too frequently policies from both the governor's office and the legislature favor those who already enjoy privilege and fail those who don't. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know Connecticut, I was talking to Michael about this, that there's actually two different Hartfords. There's Hartford, and then there's like West Hartford, which is very different dynamic, different demographics. What do you mean by that when you say that the legislation usually favors those who are already in privilege?
Well, even though Connecticut presents itself as a deep blue state with more progressive values, that is only a paper-thin facade. What actually happens is that the wealthy among us, those who end up in positions of power, often create policies and on a variety of levels, whether it's local, regional, that reinforce existing redlining or gerrymandering practices. I mean, it really does not actually lead to any significant changes for the people who are struggling the most. So, I mean, the dichotomy in Hartford is real. I mean, West Hartford is considered more affluent in some ways, and you can actually see the borders between that and Hartford. The housing quality change, there are more potholes in the street. There's no really practical way to get from one side to the other without making a mad dash across the road. The difference is not just on paper; it's palpable. So it's unfortunate. I mean, even you have two gentlemen that are running for office. One is the incumbent, and the other is a gentleman who's been trying for a number of years to unseat the incumbent. But they're essentially the same person. Wealthy, white, not having any particular investment in those who are living locally or at least outside of Fairfield County. And their values seem to trend in towards those who have more and can bolster their financial campaigns. The constant bombardments of art of commercials and whatnot to asking for money. Another thing that I didn't mention about the Green Party is that we don't accept any corporate donations in any shape or form. Money is truly the root of all evil in many senses of the world, and actually the statement is the love of money is the root of all evil, not money itself. And I personally believe that money has no business being in politics at all. From our legislature or people who represent us up in Congress, should not have any stock options, or being able to do behind the scene deals in order to bolster their portfolio. It should not exist. So, I really do believe in my own story and how it brings me to this place. I'm first generation. My family's from the Eastern Caribbean. My father was a carpenter. My mother was a live-out domestic. So she took care of, several children and several families when their parents were out socializing and doing what they need to do in order to be seen. And as a social worker, I've seen the families affected by a lot of these policies, unable to find low-income housing, unable to find ways to bolster their fixed income, unable to find mental health support, So, and I don't think that's any of the priorities of our current administration, as well as the one that's seeking to unseat it.
Well, that's right. That's very much true. And speaking of money, it says here Connecticut is one of the wealthiest states in the country, yet the gap between our haves and have-nots is greater than ever. We have that same problem here in Massachusetts. We're one of the wealthiest states in the country, but the wealth gap here is very large. The Boston Globe did a study about this, particularly just with Boston, and they said that the average net worth of a Black family in Boston is $8, and the average net worth of a white family in Boston is over 250K. And
Mhm.
you just can't deny like that type of disparity. But when that article came out, a lot of people were shocked, and some people were clutching their pearls and were just kind of like, how could that happen here? We're
Mhm.
so progressive. And I'm like, are we though, when it comes to wealth and when it comes to equity?
Mhm. Well, those are conversations that folk get very rattled by when we talk about wealth distribution, more equitable wealth distribution, not just in Connecticut or New England, but throughout the country, if not the world. What they see is their wealth being taken from them, but it's not something that was theirs to begin with. I'm doing an article on reparations and and revisiting what it would look like in terms of, well, taking a step beyond what I've seen in recent years about the concept of reparations, but actually talking about what it would look like to apply the concept into real life, in terms of the different aspects of reparations, which is not just financial. Um, so it's really unnerving because people think that some people are very heavily identified and invested in monetary gains,
Mhm.
and the thought of sharing that wealth, literally and figuratively, with anyone else, undermines their own existence and sometimes their own identity. As a person, um, I believe that it's possible that all of us can have an incredible standard of life and living, and it should not be beholden to how much money you make, you know.
Mhm.
Um, but I do believe that this country owes a great deal of debt to those who labored and toiled in order for this country to exist, you know. So
That's
yeah,
right.
yeah,
That's
it's a,
right.
it's a balancing act, and I respect where people are coming from if they've never actually had the perspective of how we got to this place in 2022. Even before 1619. Um, but it is something that will, if we do not address our past, the Martha, the Black Holocaust, the internment camp for Japanese Americans, the wholesale slaughter of First Nations people into the millions. If we do not address all of those things that have happened in our path, there is no way we can do even the simplest efforts to bridge the gap in terms of education, economics, um, just ability to function on a daily basis. It's just impossible. It's just
In
impossible.
reference to reparations, I want to get your opinion about this because some groups, some ADOS groups, believe that reparations should only go to or should be based on lineage, that it should only go to people that you could trace their lineage back to their ancestors were slaves in the United States. And
Mhm.
some feel that other people are part of that diaspora should not be included. And this has been a constant conversation about whether or not uh, Black people that their family is from like Jamaica
Mhm.
or Trinidad, Tobago. Some of those groups feel that those individuals should not qualify for reparations. And I wanted to get your opinion about that.
I have reconciled my position in that I believe that reparations is deserved of anyone who is identified on the 2020 census tract as Black. That's where I stop. It's not at 1965 with the Voting Rights Act. It's not even in the 1800s because we had seasoned slaves brought from Antigua and Barbados, and intermingled with the enslaved populations in the South. So our destinies are tied. There's no way to separate us, and I wouldn't want us to devolve into conversations of blood quantum, such as some First Nations folks had to do in order to gain recognition by the United States government. You know, so my understanding is that if you identified as Black on this last census tract, you should be entitled to any form of reparations that are due to you. And again, it's not just monetary, it is rehabilitative in nature. It is, being able to commemorate certain events and not just the Underground Railroad, but other parts of our history that brought us here and keep us here. As well as the history that we come from. Because a lot of that is, I don't recall actually learning African history when I was in high school and grade school. It was all about Eastern Europe and Western European civilizations, as if we didn't even exist, So that's where my position is on that. And when I'm in the process of finishing up my statement, I made sure that was abundantly clear. Because no matter where you came from, what boat stop you were still treated with the same level of disrespect and dehumanizing gaze because of your particular complexion, the width of your nose, all different things about your phenotypical appearance that you cannot control, right? Regardless of where you came from, you were not considered human. So for me, reparation is due to anyone who is Black identified.
That's interesting. You should have a conversation with.
I'm ready. I mean, it took a while to get there because, again, I'm first gen.
Mm-hmm.
You go back 2 generations, you're in Ireland and England on one side of my family, and the other side of family, I'm not even quite sure, So some people would say, and I've had people approach me already, that you're not necessarily Black enough. You're not necessarily American enough because you cannot trace your lineage back. Most people can't do that anyway, even if they're 4, 5, 7, 8, generations removed from, actually it should be no more than 5 generations removed from the system of enslavement. Records get lost. Records were never taken. I mean, most of the records that people have are because they documented the stuff themselves in their family Bibles, or they may have found the procurement list of former slave masters because we were considered property and they were very detailed about keeping records about their property. But most folk can't do that, So it's unfair to those who don't have the access to the Library of Congress or wherever information like that is stored and are relying on like different, products like Ancestry DNA and, 23andMe to find out exactly where their roots may fall, But our condition is shared, so it should the repair that needs to be done should also be shared.
Well, some would argue that reparations refers back to General Sherman's promise of 40 acres and a mule, which we never got that. Like that never happened, right?
40,000 of us got it. And a proportion of those, I think most of those, the land was taken by subterfuge in the years afterwards. But
and then there were multiple like Black Wall Streets that were burned down.
That's right.
It's a problem. So some people, this has been a constant, I guess, disagreement that has come about in reference to reparations is that some groups do feel that it should only apply to those who can, trace their lineage back to slavery here in the United States. So for example, if someone moves here from, let's say, Jamaica tomorrow, should they get reparations?
Like I said, my thought is based on the 2020 census tract, which is the closest one to whatever decision is made by the HR Commission. Hopefully they'll come up with some, draft policy. Other ones should be eligible for reparations. That's where I stand. Because I'm looking for, personally, a line in the sand that allows for whoever had, because my parents, for example, my parents came here in the late 60s. They still faced the 2 different sinks, one for Black and one for white. My mother remembered, and she very rarely shared this type of information with me. Remember being told that she couldn't be a police officer because she was interested in it, because, Black women could not serve in that fashion. She wasn't smart enough to be one. And she believed it because she had no other option. There was no one else to tell her, look, you can be anything you wish to be, right? So I don't think anyone is exempt from those experiences because of their arrival date.
Okay.
That's where my head is at right now. From the time that a statement is made, as far as in writing about the draft of what reparations should look like in this country, then from that point, that should be the line in the sand.
So another thing that's mentioned here is making room at the table for all political parties. It says a multi-party democracy would be more representative and less polarizing than the two-party system we have now in place. How can we fix a system that's depriving voters of choices and limiting political discourse? So a big problem that comes up a lot of times with independent and third-party candidates is this idea that you have to reach a certain percentage in order just to join the debate stage. On a national level, some people are not on the ballot in every state. So we know that these problems exist. On a local level, how do you feel about being on the debate stage and the requirements? And do you think there's any way that could be changed, at least in Connecticut?
I wasn't invited to any one of the gubernatorial debates. The first one that happened a couple of weeks ago, as well as the one that's coming up in the next few weeks, because I'm not considered a legitimate candidate. I do not have $75,000 in escrow. I do not have a formal campaign manager, a physical location. I mean, it had very specific requirements. Each League of Women Voters has the ability to stipulate what each candidate should have, available or make available to themselves in order to join other candidates on stage. And according to them, I am not worthy of joining the other candidates on that stage, on that debate stage. I am a write-in candidate at this point, which still means that I am running for office. I've been nominated by the fourth largest party in the state of Connecticut and the fourth largest party in the United States. However, that itself is not enough. And that is very terrifying to me, because that for me, and it's not just me, right? It's anyone who wants to, who feels empowered and passionate about running for a particular series of issues to help their fellow humankind and want to put themselves out there. The fact that it will be denied to them, their literal voice will be not denied, is truly a travesty of justice.
Yes, I interviewed Princess Blanding last year, and she was also running for a gubernatorial position. She ran in Virginia, and she ran into the same problem. She met all the requirements, and they wouldn't let. She showed up to debate, and they wouldn't let her debate, and her video there went pretty viral. So it's been a big problem. I want to transition here to the first 100 days, because I thought this was really interesting. These are some of the issues that you want to tackle the first 100 days. And there's a couple here that I want to look, I really want to highlight. Obviously, voting reform. Institute ranked choice voting. Now, in Massachusetts, we had this as a ballot initiative. It didn't pass because a lot of people that I spoke to didn't understand the question. That doesn't surprise me if they weren't paying attention to this and like not really knowing what this means. But institute ranked choice voting and institute default voting registration for all eligible voters, status unaffiliated. Can we talk a little bit about that?
So ranked choice voting, I think the term is slightly off-putting to some folk because they don't know exactly what that means. So being able to, to educate in the sense of what that actually looks like. And I know down here in Connecticut, we're planning some community interface opportunities where we can talk about, the cat, the dog, the wolf, the different options that you have and how each person has the opportunity to share with the public. And then based on ranked choice voting, you can choose whoever best represent you. And the remaining three are the ones who are, are off to petition for your vote. And then as far as registration, the largest group of eligible voters in the state, well, second to those who are registered with the DMV and but have not chosen a party, is the unaffiliated vote. They represent 39% of the total voting block. So by themselves, if they voted as a block, they would have the ability to sway every single election in this state, from the governor's office down, right? The reason why I chose unaffiliated, because it gives people the option to take the time, hopefully, and avail themselves of the other parties that are available in state. Not to say an unaffiliated standing is something that a person cannot retain, because I know a lot of people who are to take pride in their status as an unaffiliated voter. But at least they have the option, should they be moved by a particular candidate's speech or what they're seeking to offer, they have the option to go and vote for that person, but I think that it could be off-putting for some people who don't understand the process of registering to vote, even if the option is often, tagged along with different applications or whatever. Are you registered to vote? Blah blah blah. Um, it still gives them the power in their own hands to make a difference in their day-to-day lives. So.
Wage reform is another one I wanted to highlight. Increased
Hmm.
minimum wage to a livable wage of at least $25 per hour on
Hmm.
a tiered schedule with cost of living adjustments included. Now,
Yes,
this
ma'am.
piece is huge. The cost of living adjustments included, because I mean, we passed $15 minimum wage years ago in
Hmm.
Massachusetts, and it just went up each year till you hit that $15 mark. But the cost of living adjustments piece is important, because if the cost of living increases, but the minimum wage does not increase, or there's no adjustment for that, then a lot of times people are right back where they were before.
That's right. That's right. So if we were to match exactly where we should be in terms of the very bare minimum of wages, it would be closer to $25 per hour. So that's where I'm starting. That's where I'm
Mhm.
starting, which means that all the positions that are, like, say, for example, my role as a medical social worker, making X amount of dollars per hour, they would have to be adjusted upwards. Otherwise, they may fall, otherwise they may face a great deal of backlash at the HR department. So, I understand that it'll be very interesting. I love that word interesting because it can have a negative and a positive connotation. But it's definitely doable, because the record profits that we're experiencing for some in this country are not actual profits, they're stolen wages. And I think it should be accounted for in how much we pay those, from the bare minimum up.
All right. Healthcare reform.
Hmm.
Default registration for all uninsured persons into Medicaid coverage, and
Hmm.
craft a single payer insurance system accessible online. So the
Hmm.
healthcare one has been a huge problem for a lot of people. I do know that Washington State right now has activists that are trying to get single payer passed in Washington State. I
Right.
believe they're still trying to get the signatures to get that on the ballot. In reference to Connecticut, because I'm not sure how it works there in reference to healthcare. In
Hmm.
Massachusetts, we have something called Mass Health. It's not
Hmm.
single payer, but if you're not covered, you can apply for Mass Health, but it's means tested. So you have to fit like a certain income requirement to even get it.
Yeah.
Um, how is it in Connecticut in reference to healthcare? Because I know Connecticut's very expensive.
Very expensive, and actually, I think the ninth most expensive state to live in the country. Eighth, actually. We've moved up in the last year and a half. Um, Connecticut actually has a very robust insurance system through Medicaid. We called it Husky. It was a very interesting compromise before one from by one of the outgoing governors here. What is missing, however, and I avoid saying Medicaid for all, and using and universal health care. Well, I prefer universal health care over Medicaid for all, because Medicaid has certain stipulations that don't allow for such things, such as my role as a clinical social worker. Mental health is often one of the items that are easily accessible for people, especially for children.
Mhm.
Um, so my ideal is a single payer system that encourages strongly the different insurance plans to lobby for the business of those who they're seeking to cover, as well as get the best possible options available for each, tailored to each family's needs. Connecticut is an insurance state. I mean, we have a lot of the Aetnas, the Cignas. We're all, quite much rooted in in the culture of Connecticut. And I know they played a huge role in keeping single payer off the ballot. However, it's huge priority to me because I think that if people don't have to worry about, where they're going to get medical attention from, if their provider is accepting of their insurance for a particular procedure, or in case of mental health, can offer regular sessions at their based on availability, then they're less likely to feel a sense of insecurity about, their future. So universal health care, as well as universal education, are one of the two priorities of my administration. and my car light just went out. Um, I just left a meeting down in Mystic, and I promised I would stay for an hour, so it didn't give me enough time to go anywhere to speak to you. So forgive me.
Oh, no
Um,
worries.
but universal healthcare and universal education are two of my biggest priorities, because it allows folk to kind of traverse the the very present and real economic and social segregation that exists in Connecticut, even behind that deep blue facade.
Well said. And then one more that I want to highlight here, because I've been talking about this a lot as well, is housing reform. This piece here, employ a housing first model for persons struggling with an emphasis on unemployment / underemployment, recently educated persons, persons aging out of foster care, and persons struggling with mental health conditions. I just saw recently in Louisville, Kentucky, they actually are on their way to building homes for homeless, and not necessarily, when I say homeless, for those listening, it doesn't necessarily mean people sleeping out in the street. You can be homeless and not sleep on the street. It means people who are housing insecure. I want to get your opinion about that in particular, that project in Louisville, Kentucky, and then also how do you think this could be done in Connecticut, this housing first model?
So, kudos to folks in Louisville, Kentucky, who realize the importance of, setting the stage for self I need some coffee. For being able to establish a foundation for growth for an individual and their family. You need a home before anything else. Being able to go home to someplace to have your own space where your belongings are there and we can sit down and really just be is incredibly important to a person's mental health, as well as social welfare, right? And there have been many studies over the years that talk about, if you secure a space, and it doesn't have to be big, for someone that is their own and that they can afford, then they're more likely to thrive in, substance abuse training, job training after being released from prison or from the penal system as a whole. They're more likely to thrive because they have something to go back to, something that gives them a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose. And I recognize that in my line of work as well. One of the things that I combat on a regular basis is families who are facing housing insecurity as well as food insecurity, and it bleeds out into everything. How can you go to work for a 10-hour shift if you're wondering, whether you're going to be evicted on Friday?
Right.
How do you know when you're looking at your salary and you can only afford, $60 for the groceries? I mean, how can you focus on that exam, that term paper that you have to turn in? So for me, housing first is a priority. Once you actually have a place to live, it's easier for you to make a difference in other facets of your life. And as far as what can be done to make that happen in Connecticut, we have a tremendous backlog of blighted properties here. And properties, not just in the sense of actual physical buildings, but of land tracts in both rural centers, suburban, and urban centers. My thoughts on those properties themselves is an institute a land value tax. So the property itself, you would have to pay, instead of a decreased tax rate, you would have to pay for the value of the land itself or the property itself. So that would add to the coffers of the state and allow us to do things like build a low-income housing unit, not affordable housing, because affordable means something totally different to many different people. But if it's tacked on your income and your ability to afford that monthly rent, that's more appropriate for many families that we have out there, as well as single individuals. So, looking into reforming, revamping, if not removing completely blighted properties, is one of the ways in which we can add to our stock. In addition to that, using the monies that we gain from legalizing and regulating cannabis, moving to a more progressive tax system that focuses on wealth distribution, especially from Fairfield County, which is our richest county in state, the Gold Coast of Connecticut, would allow us to make even more opportunities where not just, a flat face housing unit, but actual communities be built from the ground up.
And this piece here, which I think is incredibly important because some people may not know about this, establish legal precedent to regulate purchasing and renting out properties in Connecticut by out-of-state landlords. And this is a big one because some states don't have any type of rule in place that prevents people from doing that. So if your landlord lives in another state and something goes wrong with your apartment or the apartment building, they're not there. They're not within a close distance to be able to come and help you.
Nor are they necessarily vested in helping you at all. So that comes from a very personal experience where I had one of my clients whose apartment building, she had one of the units there, was bought out by an out-of-state landlord. And I was sitting there yelling at this gentleman on the phone because it had gotten heated. He was telling me that, he had offered the opportunity for her to leave when he told her that he was doubling her rent, and she didn't take it. And I said, well, how do you expect her to leave? With what money do you expect her to move? Because you need money to move, right? You need money for the moving expenses themselves, to get supplies to pack your stuff. And money is also time. Who's going to spend the time for, to come out and do that just for nothing? There's $3,000 to $4,000 worth of money that needs to happen in order to move a 1 to 2 bedroom apartment in itself, depending on what the person has. So I'm like, well, how do you expect this woman to move? Couldn't have an answer for that. And then he said, well, I'm paying this huge mortgage and, I have to charge this. I said, well, why did you take on a mortgage that you can't afford? Well, he didn't like that at all. Didn't like that at all, right? Because then you're putting the responsibility on them. Why would you put yourself in considerable amount of debt just to hold onto this property and at the same time displace the communities that have been living, or the families rather, who've been living in this unit for 10 years? Like, why would you consider that appropriate? So we have these businesses such as that are marketing themselves as almost freelancers in the game, and they're buying up properties and reselling them to certain other people to either change the entire demographic of a neighborhood, raise the property values so that certain demographics can't afford to be there, and or just crowd out individual buyers who are trying to make a home of their own. So, and I think it's despicable. And that Connecticut should be the first state to legalize protections against those who are being pushed out because of these initiatives by out-of-state, sometimes slum landlords.
And here are just some of the stances and positions for Green Party Connecticut: investment in local and regional mass transit by rail, invest in public banking. Oh, if Roger Meadows is listening, he's going to love this one. That's a big one for him. Ending cash bail, mail-in ballots and ranked choice voting, ending education funding through property taxes, creation and preservation of more preserves, reserves, and wildlife habitats, electric train car manufacturing in state, converting blighted properties and abandoned lots into low-income housing in state parks, eradicating dependence on gas-powered cars and vans in state fleet, promotion of regenerative agricultural carbon sequestration, investment in sequestration, investment in community-based restorative justices initiatives, diverting resources to underfunded school initiatives and programming for children, youth, and young adults. Yeah, these are we have a lot of similarities based on state. Like we have a lot of problem. Like we have public transportation here, but it's terrible. And they shut down like 2 of the lines for 30 days. There's a worker shortage, but the public transportation here has been abysmal for, I'd say, the past 10 years that I've lived here. Money has not been put towards it where it was supposed to. So I don't know what happened to that money. The maintenance wasn't being done on these trains. And then also with the public transportation, it only goes to certain neighborhoods and to certain areas. So for a lot of people that live in like the low income neighborhoods in Boston, they don't have access to the subway. They only have like a bus.
Right. A lot of the areas here as well there are no subways. So what you have is bus to bus connections. And I appreciate the fact, well, due to COVID, ridership has increased because there are no bus fares, they're free. So you see a lot of people who had been, essentially car hopping, borrowing cars, walking, doing whatever they need to do to get to work, are now using the bus line. I would like to to extend that into perpetuity, that the bus lines are free, because that only helps people get from place to place. We do have a standing freight line or series of freight lines in state that can be repurposed, repurposed to include regional and intra rail lines. A lot of the focus in the past has been, in my humble review of it, has been focused on the 95 corridor and rail transportation to and from like New York, but not really what people in state need. I mean, we have the quiet corner here, which is a portion of the state that is a little bit more rural, a little bit more far removed from the hotspots of Bridgeport and Hartford, but has a credible amount of cultural and even environmental diversity. But at the same time, in the midst of that, are very estranged from a lot of different opportunities that they can find elsewhere. So I imagine, like if you're living in far-flung areas of Stonington, that you can hop on a train and be anywhere in the state in less than 45 minutes. I mean, that's the idea, right? I believe that we are the only country out of the G8 that doesn't have like mass transit system, that the super fast, the bullet train level train. We're the only country that doesn't have that. And since we market ourselves as an empire, the fact that we pay so little to what our constituents need, it's just nightmarish to me. And growing up in New York, I'm very spoiled. I enjoyed the fruit of those trees, of those mass transit trees. I can hop on a train and be anywhere I chose to be, So it really allows for mobility in all senses of the word. Economic mobility, if you're able to find a job elsewhere where there's a train line that you can get off and maybe catch a shuttle. It offers the opportunity for kids who grew up in the so-called inner city to go to libraries, aquariums, other venues outside of that would normally be outside of their reach or dependent to get to by car, and they can use mass transit to get there. So I think it's that is the third priority on my list of priorities overall, is to develop a strong, resilient mass transit system in state.
And it says here, Room at the Table is an anti-establishment, anti-fascist, anti-imperialist, worker-led campaign founded on universal themes of social justice, human rights, peace, and the dignity of all persons to live and thrive in Connecticut. What are some of the things, and I ask this because I think that people have this fairy tale of what they think Connecticut is like. A lot of times when we see Connecticut depicted, especially through Hollywood, it's usually the Stepford Wives or like Greenwich, Connecticut, that type. What do you think are some of the things that people get wrong about Connecticut, and how would you describe what Connecticut is really like to people who may live in a different state per se?
It's interesting because yes, the impression of the Wall Street hounds that work in Manhattan and then have these lush sprawling estates in the corner of the state, and then if you go a little further, it's as if you're going into the Badlands, Bridgeport, Stratford, Hartford. When people when that comes up in the news, people often think it's like a drug den, where people are loose and fast with money, and there's just crime, everywhere which way you turn. But Connecticut is an incredibly beautiful, incredibly diverse, and wonderful place to live and raise children. We have some of the best schools in the country right here. We have some of the best vistas in terms of being, out and about in nature. We have a coastline with phenomenal beaches that the general public can have access to. In some ways, there are private places, of course, but the public beaches and the community spaces are just vast and amazing. I feel privileged to be able to raise my son here. All right. So I think that there needs to be an understanding that everywhere you go, there are places in light and places in darkness. Right. There's some things that are are beautiful and wonderful and just a joyous place to live. But then there are other elements that need to be addressed in some fashion. The hidden poverty, which is actually not so hidden, it's quite blatant in many parts of our state. The lack of opportunities for people who don't have a college education or even those who do have a college education can't find work because sometimes they're being outpaced by those who have, more time in the job. Or like myself in the 90s, I was looking for work, in an environment where there were 4 generations that were still present. I grew up thinking that the job would be waiting for me once I did what I was supposed to do, right? Go to college, get that degree, you know what I mean? And fill up my resume with volunteer and other career experiences. So when I was ready to jump in, there was nowhere for me to jump, you know? And I think the aftershocks of that are still being felt today. So, like any place, like I said, there are places in light and there are places in darkness. But overall, I think Connecticut has so much potential to offer its residents, and really should be a beacon to New England in terms of what we can do cooperatively if we have enough political will.
Well said. All right, Michelle, how can people support your campaign?
Oh my goodness. Keep me in your prayers, first of all. I come from a family that believes in the power of prayer. So, definitely do that. If you would like to get in touch, feel free to reach out to me on my website, which is www.roomatthetable4.us. And I believe it was posted in the chat. Thank you again, Eric. You can call me. I'm not afraid to give my Google Voice number, 860-255-8189. This weekend, I'll be at the End Hate Rally in Torrington. It's one of 4 or 5 rallies that are happening throughout the state. I was at the rally in Middletown about 2.5 weeks ago, and we talked about how joy and love are the 2 ways that we combat hate and hatred in this state, and how they are calls to really rally around what's the good in all of us, but at the same time be very upfront about addressing injustices, to the bulk of us. So you can reach me in those 2 ways. If you want to email me, bicking.michelle@gmail.com. I am always available to anyone who wants to check in, to talk policy, to talk about God, anything. If you need some social work help and a listening ear, sister is a social worker, birth doula, former 1st grade teacher, I got you. Just give me a call. Reach out any way you wish.
Awesome. Michelle, thank you so much for coming on. I have another Green Party candidate coming on next week. So it's been like three or 4 of you this month, but thank you so much for coming on and good luck.
Thank you so much, my dear. Thank you, everybody.